I never imagined that a simple trip to reconnect with nature would turn into one of those bone-chilling, true scary stories from the deep forest that I had often read about online. My name is Alec, and along with my friends Bryn, Axel, and Sage, we decided to escape the chaos of New York City for a weekend. Our destination: a secluded cabin nestled in the heart of a dense forest in the northern part of the state. The sun was already setting by the time we finally reached the cabin. After hours of driving along winding roads that grew narrower by the mile, the air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. A welcome change from the asphalt and pollution of the city. Axel, always the most enthusiastic of the group, jumped out of the car as soon as we stopped. "Finally, welcome to paradise, guys," he exclaimed, stretching his arms wide as if to embrace the entire forest. Bryn and Sage exchanged skeptical glances, but I could feel a mix of excitement and apprehension bubbling in my stomach. As we unloaded the car, I couldn't help but notice the oppressive silence that surrounded us. There were no car noises, no sirens, no constant hum of the city, just the occasional chirping of birds and the whisper of the wind in the trees. It felt as if the forest was watching us, waiting. We stepped into the cabin, a rustic wooden structure that seemed to have seen better days. The interior was simple: a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Sage, the architect among us, immediately started inspecting every corner, her professional eye at work. "This place is interesting," she murmured, running her finger along a dusty shelf. As night fell, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew heavier. Bryn suggested we make a bonfire outside to ease the tension. "Come on, guys. Some scary stories by the fire are exactly what we need to get into the forest mood," she said with a forced smile. Gathered around the crackling flames, we began sharing eerie tales we had heard over the years. Axel, always the most dramatic, wildly gesticulated as he narrated deep forest legends his grandfather used to tell. With each story, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, not just from the chilly night air, but from a growing sense of unease. It was then that Sage, usually the most skeptical of us, suddenly turned pale and pointed towards the darkness beyond the firelight. Do you see that?" she stuttered. We followed her gaze, but saw nothing but the dancing shadows of the trees. Axel nervously laughed, trying to ease the tension. "Come on, Sage. Your imagination is getting the better of you." But I wasn't so sure. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something moving in the shadow sand, undefined form, darker than the night around it. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling that we were about to become characters in one of those spine-chilling stories we had just told. We decided to head back inside. The festive atmosphere completely dissipated. The cabin, which had initially felt cozy, now seemed claustrophobic. The wooden walls seemed to close in on us, as if the very cabin itself was suffocating us. Bryn suggested we play cards to distract ourselves, but none of us could focus. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of the wind against the windows made us jump. As the night wore on, the tension inside the cabin became almost palpable. We decided to try to sleep, hoping that daylight would bring some relief to our frayed nerves. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep, the sounds of the forest seeming amplified in the stillness of the night. That was when I heard it. A low sound, almost inaudible at first, but gradually growing louder. It was like a hum, but not from insects. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I sat up abruptly, my heart hammering in my chest. "Axel? Bryn? Do you hear that?" I whispered into the dark. Before anyone could respond, a sharp scream pierced the air. It was Sage. We rushed to her room, stumbling over each other in the darkness. When we finally managed to turn on a light, the scene that greeted us was one of pure horror straight out of deep forest eerie stories. Sage was huddled in a corner, her eyes wide with terror, frantically pointing towards the window. "It's out there!" she screamed. That thing." We crowded around the window, and that was when I saw it. A tall, lanky figure with limbs too long to be human hovered at the forest's edge. Its skin seemed to glow under the moonlight, a sickly pallor that contrasted with the darkness all around. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we froze, staring at this impossible creature. Then, as if sensing our gaze, the thing turned its head in our direction. It had no eyes, only dark cavities where they should have been. An inhuman smile spread across its face, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Panic took hold of us. Bryn screamed, Axel swore, and I simply froze. The creature began moving towards us, its movements erratic and unnatural. With each step it took, the air around it seemed to distort, as if its very presence was an affront to reality. "We have to get out of here," Axel shouted, finally breaking our collective trance. We ran out of the room, tripping over each other in our haste. I could hear a horrible sound coming from outside of something between a moan and a scream that made my blood run cold. It was as if the entire forest was screaming along with us. We reached the car, our hands shaking so badly we could barely open the doors. Axel turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and died. "No, no, no," he shouted, trying again. The sound of the creature drawing closer was deafening, echoing through the forest like a chorus of tortured souls. And then, in that moment when I thought all was lost, when I thought we would become just another one of those disturbing stories of disappearances in the forest, the engine finally caught. Axel floored the accelerator, and we sped off down the dirt road, leaving the cabin and that horrible thing behind. We drove through the night, in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When the sun finally rose, illuminating the road ahead, we collectively sighed with relief. We were alive, we had escaped, but we knew we would never be the same. To this day, years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat. The image of that creature burned into my mind. We never returned to that forest, nor did we speak of what happened that night, but I know we all carry the scars of that experience. It was one of those true scary stories that changed our lives forever. An encounter with the unknown that showed us there are more mysteries in this world than we can comprehend. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers of the forest, reminding me that there are places where the veil between our world and the unknown is too thin for comfort. And somewhere out there in that deep, dark forest, I know that creature still waits, ready to create more terrifying forest tales for those unfortunate enough to cross its path. I never imagined that an innocent night expedition would turn into one of the most terrifying deep forest stories ever experienced. I'm Thorn, and along with my friends Lysander and Elowen, we decided to explore a shadowy trail in the Shadowmere forest. We were young, fearless, and eager for thrills. Little did we know that we were about to live through one of the most chilling forest horror stories of our lives. Darkness quickly engulfed the landscape as we ventured into the thick vegetation. The air was dense, heavy with moisture that seemed to cling to our skin. Our footsteps echoed peculiarly, as if the forest itself was monitoring our every move, absorbing our presence. Lysander, always the boldest, led the way with his flashlight, while Elowen and I followed closely behind. "Do you guys hear that?" Elowen murmured, her voice wavering. We froze, straining our ears. A low, guttural sound reverberated in the distance, sending my heart racing. "It's probably just some animal," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. But there was something about that noise that sounded abnormal, unnatural. It was as if the forest was sending us a sinister warning. We continued our journey, but the surroundings seemed to shift subtly. The trees appeared to bend towards us, their twisted branches casting grotesque shadows on the forest floor. The wind whispered through the foliage, carrying with it the echo of distant laughter and muffled screams. I tried to convince myself that it was just our imagination playing tricks. Yet, with each step, we ventured deeper into the bowels of that eerie forest, and the feeling of not being alone grew with every passing moment. Then we caught a glimpse of it, a flash of movement in the twilight, too quick to be captured by our flashlights. Something bulky, impossible to identify, but undeniably present. Elwyn grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What was that?" she asked, her voice laced with terror. Lysander, for the first time, hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we should head back." In that moment, we understood that we were about to experience one of those scary encounters from the legends of deep forests. But this time, it was real, and we were at its center. Fear seeped into our bones as we decided to turn back. Lysander, his usual bravado completely gone, suggested, "Let's go back the same way, fast and quiet." We nodded tensely, our eyes frantically scanning the surrounding darkness. The forest, once a playground for adventures, had transformed into a horror story setting, each shadow potentially hiding indescribable threats. As we moved, the sounds of the forest intensified. Branches snapped under our feet, echoing like gunshots in the night. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it unintelligible whispers. Elwyn grabbed my hand, her icy fingers trembling against mine. "Lorne," she whispered, "do you hear that? It sounds like something is following us." I stopped, straining my ears. At first, I only heard the frantic beating of my heart. Then, I perceived it. A rhythmic sound, like heavy footsteps coming from behind us. It alternated between fast and slow, as if the creature was playing with us. It was one of those terrifying encounters that I would never forget. A scary story unfolding in real time. Lysander, his usual bravado completely gone, murmured, "Run, now." He didn't need to say it twice. We sprinted down the trail, branches lashing at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every hurried step. Terror propelled us forward, turning the forest into a blur of shadows and distorted shapes. The sounds of pursuit intensified, drawing closer with each passing second. My heart threatened to burst from my chest, my lungs burning with the effort. Then, Elwyn stumbled, falling heavily to the forest floor. I stopped to help her, and that was when I saw it. A massive figure, darker than the night around it, loomed between the trees. It had no distinct shape. Its contours seemed to shift and undulate like smoke. But the eyes shone with a malevolent intelligence that chilled my soul. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we stood frozen, locked in a stare with that creature. It was as if we were living one of those true horror stories we heard around the campfire, but infinitely more terrifying. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of a guttural growl. The sound of that growl still reverberated in our ears as we resumed our desperate escape. The forest, now completely hostile, seemed to conspire against us. Sharp branches tore at our clothes and skin. Treacherous roots threatened to trip us with every hurried step. We were living one of the most spine-chilling forest stories, and the fear of not surviving to tell the tale was palpable. "Over here!" Lysander shouted, pointing to a clearing ahead. We ran towards the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, hoping to find salvation. But as we reached it, we realized our terrible mistake. The clearing was actually the edge of a steep cliff, completely blocking our escape. Breathless and panicked, we turned back to face the darkness of the forest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our rapid breathing and the occasional snap of distant branches. "What do we do now?" Elwyn whispered, her voice thick with fear. Before any of us could respond, a terrifying howl pierced the air, making our blood run cold. It was a sound that did not belong in this world, a mix of fury and hunger that defied comprehension. "It's coming!" I shouted, my voice unrecognizable with terror. In that moment of sheer horror, we made an unthinkable decision. With the creature rapidly approaching and the cliff at our backs, we chose what seemed to be the lesser of two evils. Holding on to each other, we jumped off the cliff's edge into the dark waters of a river below. The fall seemed to last an eternity. The wind howled in our ears, mixing with our screams of terror. For a brief instant, I saw the silhouette of the creature on the cliff's edge, its bright eyes following us as we fell. The impact with the water was brutal. The icy current enveloped us, threatening to drag us into the depths. We struggled against the current, grasping at anything we could reach. Miraculously, we managed to drag ourselves to the shore, crawling out of the water, shivering with cold and fear, exhausted and in shock. We huddled together in silence, unable to believe what we had just experienced. We had survived one of the most unbelievable hauntings one could imagine, a story that bordered on the paranormal, but was painfully real to us. As the first ray of sunlight pierced the morning mist, we found ourselves still trembling by the river's edge, our clothes soaked and clinging to our bodies. The silence among us was heavy, burdened by the weight of the previous night's events. We had survived one of the most disturbing forest horror stories, but the emotional toll was evident in our haunted gazes. Lysander was the first to break the silence. "We need to get out of here," he murmured, his voice hoarse and devoid of his usual confidence. We nodded without speaking, slowly getting to our feet. Our bodies ached, marked by scratches and bruises from our desperate escape through the forest and the fall into the river. We walked slowly along the riverbank, navigating by the rising sun. The forest, which now seemed eerily peaceful in the daylight, held the secrets of the previous night. Every sound, the chirp of a bird, the rustle of leaves made us flinch, momentarily reliving the terror we had experienced. What was that thing? Eloan finally voiced the question haunting our minds. No one immediately answered. How could we explain the unexplainable? That creature, with its bright eyes and indistinct form, defied any rational explanation. It was an enigma straight out of the legends of deep forests, a nightmare brought to life. After what felt like hours of walking, we finally reached the outskirts of the town. The sight of the first houses brought an indescribable relief, but also a sense of unreality. How could we return to our normal lives after facing the unimaginable? We stopped at the forest's edge, looking back one last time. The density of the trees seemed to hide countless secrets, spine-chilling stories yet untold. We made a silent pact in that moment. We'd never return to that place, and we would never speak of what happened. As we walked away, carrying with us one of the true scary stories that few would believe, I realized that something fundamental had changed within us. The innocence of youth had been replaced by a dark knowledge of the mysteries lurking in the shadows of the world. Our adventure in the Shadowmere Forest had come to an end, but the memories of that terrifying night would linger forever. A silent reminder of the horrors that lurk in the depths of mysterious forests, waiting for the unwary who dared to disturb their domain. I will never forget that Christmas night in the deep forest. Lisa, at just 5 years old, was camping with my family and friends in a dense and mysterious woodland. The cold air nipped at our cheeks as 9 of us kids ran among the towering trees, our laughter echoing in the darkness. Our parents gave us a walkie-talkie, our lifeline in that vast greenery. "Don't wander too far," warned my mother, Rose, her eyes filled with concern as they shone in the firelight. I promised we would stay close. Little did I know that night would become one of the true scary stories that would haunt me for years. As we played hide and seek among the knotted trunks, the walkie-talkie crackled, making us pause. A deep, unfamiliar voice emerged from the device, sending shivers down my spine. "Ho, ho, ho! Children, it's Santa Claus here," the voice said, with a cheerfulness that seemed forced. "I'm trying to find you to deliver your presents. How about you help me look?" My heart raced, a mix of excitement and inexplicable fear settling in my chest. I looked to my friends Willow, River, and the others' their faces, a mix of delight and confusion. "Let's go!" shouted Willow, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. We ran back to the campsite, our small legs struggling against the roots and stones in the dark path. The forest seemed denser, the shadows more menacing. We arrived breathless, shouting about Santa Claus on the walkie-talkie. But our parents' reaction was not what we expected. Their faces paled, exchanging worried glances that we didn't understand at the time. My father, Everett's face hardened as he heard our story. Without a word, he snatched the walkie-talkie from our trembling hands. The silence that followed was scarier than any forest noise. The adults huddled, whispering urgently, casting furtive glances into the darkness that surrounded us. "Kids, stay close to the fire," ordered Uncle Jasper, his usually jovial voice now laden with tension. We obeyed, huddling close to the crackling flames, seeking comfort in their warmth as excitement gave way to growing fear. As the night progressed, the woodland seemed to come alive. Branches snapped in the darkness. Leaves rustled without any apparent wind. Every sound made my heart jump, imagining what might be lurking in the shadows. Was it really Santa Claus? Or something more sinister? River, the oldest among us, tried to distract us with stories, but even his words fell flat against the terror that had settled in our campsite. The adults took turns keeping watch, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line, as if expecting something to emerge at any moment. In a moment of courage, or perhaps childish naivety, I approached my mother. "Mommy," I whispered, "why can't we go look for Santa Claus?" Her eyes, usually full of warmth, were cold with fear. She pulled me close, her voice trembling slightly as she replied, "Sometimes, dear, there are things in the deep forests that are best left alone." Her words, more than anything, solidified the terror of that night in my young mind. The hours dragged like shadows in the forest, each minute feeling like an eternity. The sound of breaking branches in the distance made us jump, imagining scary stories of creatures lurking in the darkness. The campfire, our only source of light and comfort, cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, transforming them into threatening figures. Willow, always the bravest among us, whispered, "What if it's not really Santa Claus?" Her question hung in the air, voicing the fear we all felt. River, trying to maintain calm, replied, "Maybe it's just someone playing a prank." But the tremor in his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. The adults kept a constant vigil, their eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness beyond the campfire's light. Uncle Jasper and my father, Everett, spoke in low tones, their words laden with concern. Could be anyone. Dangerous. Children at risk. Fragments of their conversation reached my ears, heightening my anxiety. As the night wore on, the sounds of the forest seemed to intensify. The distant howl of a wolf made my blood run cold. The trees creaked and moaned in the wind, as if they were alive and aware of our presence. Every unexpected noise made me imagine the owner of that mysterious voice sneaking up on our campsite. Exhausted by fear and the long night, we children finally succumbed to sleep, huddled together like frightened pups. But my sleep was agitated, filled with nightmares of shadowy figures moving among the trees, calling my name with inhuman voices. I woke up several times, my heart pounding wildly, only to see the adults still vigilant, their tense faces illuminated by the dying fire. The sunrise finally dispersed the forest shadows, bringing with it a tangible relief. In the daylight, the woodland seemed less threatening, but the fear of the previous night still lingered over us like a persistent fog. The adults, with dark circles under their eyes from a sleepless night, began to break down the campsite with an urgency that didn't go unnoticed. As we packed up, I overheard snippets of conversations among the adults. Words like danger, predator, and authorities floated in the air, fueling my already active imagination. My mother rose, noticing my anxious gaze, knelt beside me. "Lisa," she said softly, "what happened last night was very serious. That voice on the walkie-talkie, it wasn't Santa Claus." Her grave tone made my stomach sink. "But who was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Someone who shouldn't be here, dear. Someone dangerous." The reality of the situation began to settle in, transforming what I thought was a Christmas adventure into one of the true horror stories I would never forget. As we prepared to leave, River, with an unusual seriousness for his age, gathered us kids together. "Remember," he said, "what happened here stays between us. It's our deep forest secret." I nodded, feeling the weight of that silent pact. That experience bonded us in a way that only shared fear could. Years passed, and that night in the forest became one of the scary stories we occasionally shared in whispers. But for me, Lisa, it remained more than that. It was a vivid reminder of the hidden dangers in the shadows, of the threats that lurk beyond our understanding. The deep forest kept its secret, but it left in me a permanent echo of respect for the unknown, and an acute awareness that not all voices in the darkness are friendly. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.